Well, good afternoon, and thank you for joining us for today's Business Success Series presented by Manulife in conversation with Mike Morrice. And he, of course, is the new MP for Kitchener Centre. My name is Ian McLean, and I'm the President and CEO of the Greater Kitchener-Waterloo Chamber of Commerce. Before we get started, I would like to take a moment to acknowledge that we do live and work on the traditional territory of the Neutral, Anishinaabe, and Haudenosaunee peoples, as we seek a renewed relationship based on a foundation of mutual understanding and respect. As participants in today's virtual event, we are coming together as one. We believe everyone is free to be their true self and receive the same respect and opportunity, regardless of age, ethnicity, gender, culture, identity, sexual orientation, beliefs, or language. We hope you will join us in fostering a positive environment here today that is a safe and welcoming space for all. We know that there is more that we can do, and we are committed to listening, learning, and growing as we go. Today's session would not be possible without the continued support of our sponsors and partners. So a special thank you today to our title sponsor for the Business Success Series, Manulife, our platinum sponsor for the series, the Immigration Partnership of Waterloo Region. These organizations and many others are committed to supporting our local economy and providing businesses with the resources and tools they need to thrive. I would now like to welcome our good friend Andrew Kugler, Vice President, Small Business Group Benefits Canada with Manulife, to say a few words. Andrew.
Thanks, Ian. Good afternoon, everyone. Well, it is a pleasure to be here and help introduce this fantastic discussion with Mike. As you know, I grew up in Waterloo Region. I've worked for Manulife over 17 years, so I'm a bit of a local person. You know, I believe environmental sustainability is and will continue to be a crucial part of both business and personal success. Everyone and every business can play a role. At Manulife, we have introduced our climate approach, which focuses on 3 pillars. The first one is sustainability in reducing emissions for our employee operations. The second is steering our investment portfolio towards net zero and growing renewable green investments. And finally, the third is building products that contribute to climate change mitigation. So with that, let me finish by saying it is wonderful to be here on behalf of Manulife. Thank you, and please enjoy the session. Back to you, Ian.
Well, thanks, Andrew, and we always appreciate how much of a wonderful partner Manulife is, and certainly with the footprint that you have here in Waterloo Region, tentacles of not only the business but the people that animate our community are felt and through the employee base of Manulife. So just before the session begins, or before I get into it with Mike, I'd like to go over a few quick reminders. Please ensure your microphone is muted throughout the session so we can reduce any background noise. If you have a tech-related question, please comment in the chat section, and a representative of our team will get back to you right away. If you have a question for today's speaker, they'll be gathered throughout the session. I'll try and gather those in the chat box and pose those to Mike throughout the session. All attendees will be sent a recording of today's presentation. Will be also made available on the Greater KW Chamber website. I now have the privilege of introducing today's guest, my good friend, Kitchener Centre MP, Mike Morrice. Mike has spent his career bringing people together, whether working with different levels of government or for not-for-profit organizations. Mike has a proven track record for introducing ambitious ideas along with finding the funds to pay for them. He is the founder of Sustainable Waterloo Region, co-creator of Climate Action Waterloo Region, and piloted Canada's first green economy hub. This later led to Green Economy Canada and 8 green economy hubs across the country, which have enabled hundreds of organizations to both lower their carbon footprint and increase their profitability. He has also initiated Evolve One, Canada's first net positive energy multi-tenant building, which an ambitious group of individuals brought to fruition. Mike fell in love with the spirit of Waterloo Region while completing a double degree in business and computer electronics at WLU. Today, he lives on Block 2 on the Haldimand Tract in the Cherry Park neighborhood of Kitchener. He is an active community volunteer and has served on multiple local boards and committees, including Kitchener Housing, Women's Crisis Services, and the KW Awesome Foundation. And also working as Wilfrid Laurier's first social entrepreneur in residence. Mike believes in using a platform to amplify the concerns of the community, and this includes his commitment to science-based action on climate, to racial justice, and to completing Canada's social safety net. Mike is inspired by the great things people can accomplish when we genuinely listen to one another and look for common ground. So he's ran for Parliament in 2019, increasing the Green vote from 3% to 26%. And he ran again in 2021, winning the riding along with the title of Ontario's first elected Green MP. Mike was named Young Alumnus of the Year by Laurier in 2011, Young Entrepreneur of the Year by the KW Chamber of Commerce in 2012, and given a special citation for social entrepreneurship by EY in 2018. So thank you for joining us today, Mike. I really appreciate you joining us. This is, I know how having a little bit of experience with a father who was an MP for 15 years. I can only imagine that it's gotten busier over the years, but you must be absolutely swamped getting new jobs, staff, getting yourself acclimatized both here in Waterloo or Kitchener in your writing office and in Ottawa. Maybe, but just as we get started, and maybe it's just my interest, but tell me what the first whirlwind several months have been like is in your new role.
Well, first of all, thanks so much for having me this afternoon, Ian, and thank you all for joining us. Particularly being in Ottawa this week, having a chance to connect with folks back home is a real highlight. So yeah, I appreciate the chance to have the conversation. I've been saying the word surreal a lot, but it is true, right? Particularly those first few weeks when I think a lot of other folks across the country were pretty surprised by what happened in Kitchener Centre. Of course, we'd been building up to this over the course of 3 years. But for a lot of other folks across the country, it was sort of what happened, Ontario's first Green MP. And so there was quite a bit of media those first several weeks to share the story about, what had shifted and really about democracy ahead of politics. I attribute a large part of the progress we made to that interest in actually listening to folks. And listening even when we might not, or maybe particularly so, we can disagree without being disagreeable. And I think that that story was really important to tell others across the country, as well as about the things we'd heard. Every chance I got to talk about the unaffordability of housing in our community, the 35% increase in house prices, about mental health and the challenges, the number of parents I spoke with, in tears, talking about teenage children of theirs through the pandemic and the challenges they were facing. And of course, talking about climate. And so a lot of those first few weeks was telling the story and sharing with others across the country what I'd been hearing from our neighbors across Kitchener Centre. And the time since about kind of putting that foundation in place, whether that's hiring staff, leasing an office, working through our caucus, all of the work to be a good foundation now, to be doing the work in Ottawa and starting to actually use the tools available, whether that's, questions and question period, direct conversation with the Prime Minister, whatever the case might be, to make sure we take every opportunity to have our voices heard.
Yeah, and I think that's we'll come up to this a little bit later about the Waterloo region approach, but let's maybe rewind to the beginning of the story, and partly this is today's session. I think is just important because there's a lot of firsts here. First Ontario Green MP, first Green MP certainly for Waterloo region. I think we have a history of being concerned and care for the environment, whether it's starting with groundwater, but where we are now in a whole range of issues. But how did you land in Waterloo region? You're not from here originally, but explain sort of the Waterloo region component of your history.
So there's the short version and the slightly longer one. The short version is, of course, for university. Laurier had this really innovative double degree program that allowed me to split time between computer electronics, so like microprocessor, building robots, and the business side. The longer answer that I don't get a chance to share as much is that truthfully, when I was in high school, I was dating a woman who I met through church youth groups. And I went to high school in Newmarket, just north of Toronto. And my girlfriend at the time was actually a student at KCI. And so when I was assessing which university to go to, we both thought, Laurier, she was leaning towards the same. So that was that added boost for picking Laurier. Truthfully, the relationship ended within about a year. But I'm so glad, though, having made that choice, not only for the Laurier community, but for the sense of community I felt through my undergrad as a part of Waterloo Region. And really in the time towards the end of my undergrad, as we were starting Sustainable Waterloo Region, folks like yourself, Communitech, the mayor, Mayor Halloran at the time, so many people in our community really embraced that aspiration that a number of us had to work with the business community to take a leadership role on climate. And I've learned in the years since, as we've shared that model with other communities, part of what is transferable, but also part of what is unique about that willingness to take risks in our community, to support one another, this idea that we can kind of have all boats rising together. It's pretty special. But yeah, there's the longer story of what brought me to Waterloo Region.
Well, that's interesting. I mean, the fact that you followed a woman here, that's our win, that you ended up here. So, and just before I leave that, I think for many of us, our families shape kind of who we are and what we do. How did your family kind of roots and background sort of shape not only the decisions you made to come here, but what you're going to do in your career?
Yeah, these are reflections I've had more recently to understand better. One is I was the middle of three boys growing up, and my older brother got into a good amount of trouble. And so there was some tension at home between parents and siblings and all that. And I found growing up, I often took on kind of a mediator type of a role at home. And I only recently have I kind of made that connection between what I've spent my time in my adult life, kind of trying to build bridges and mediate conflict and try to bring people together that might not otherwise feel they've got a lot in common. And, realize that, hey, that might have been honed through my those formative years growing up at home, that was often the role that I played in our family with some of that mediation. The other side is that my dad was also an entrepreneur. I can remember when I was like 11 years old, he was selling this a wheel for Nintendo 64. And so it was like this new innovation that rather than a controller, you can, race with a steering wheel. And he was distributing through Costco and all this at the time. So, my first job was playing Mario Kart at a Costco, demonstrating one of these wheels. It was, cleaning old karaoke machines that he would sell. We'd refurbish and then resell again. And so that, that entrepreneurial spirit, that openness to risk taking, I have a very, a privileged background and upbringing. And part of that is the amount of love and support I've always felt from my parents. Starting out, coming out of university, not getting a paycheck, not having an employer really besides this nonprofit we'd made up. There might be some parents who would have kind of scratched their head a bit and said, hey, how about you get a real job? But I think, both my parents and my dad in particular, around that entrepreneurial streak he had, I think meant that he was all the more encouraging as I kind of set out on my own path. Of course, I took a bit of a different route. It was more of kind of a climate entrepreneurship, but I the whole way along, I always felt supported by my parents too.
Now, so let's start start? I mean, I think you and I have known each other. I was on city council, and then I think you were still a student or just getting started with Sustainable Waterloo, but it must have been 2008 or 7, 8, 9, somewhere in that zone. I'm old enough that I can't remember actual dates, but it was somewhere in that window of time. Talk about the Sustainable Waterloo and how you formulated that, because that was your leadership, and I remember you coming to City Council and describing what you had put together so far and where you intended to go with it. And I can say honestly, having been around politics for a lot of years and in it myself, that you can hear stories sometimes and go, yeah, well, that's not going to work, and then you kind of see some and you kind of go, there's something there. And there was always, I think, the notion that there was something there, and whether it was the entrepreneurship together with the idea or the way that you brought people together. But talk about how you brought that Sustainable Waterloo, because it still exists today. Obviously, our colleagues or our friends there are still doing a great job. It's grown into a leading organization here in Waterloo Region. And we'll talk about the national part of that in a moment, but talk about the formation of that, and how you got it going.
Well, yeah, and certainly as we talk about the second part of that, that the current executive director, Tova Davidson, of course, taking it to even greater heights. But for me and some friends of mine at the time, I think it was this mix between being so frustrated that that our political leaders weren't doing more on climate, and also having this optimism. And I think it's part of maybe even naivety that we could do something that would make a difference. And of course, with a business background, just felt so drawn towards businesses measure what matters to them. So why aren't more businesses setting targets and reporting back, and could we support them if we were to provide software and a network and tools and provide recognition too, so that that as businesses were to go beyond regulation and set those goals, that they would get recognized for doing so. And of course, from a kind of a social entrepreneurship lens, wanted to ensure we weren't always relying on grants. We applied, of course, for initial seed funding, but wanted to have a model where through membership fees and sponsorship, that it could be financially self-sufficient, that when we were pitching to a business, we could let them know that they can count on this program, this offering existing for them over the long term. And so I think part of it was that that blend between, really that push for knowing that businesses stood to benefit here, that there was a business case for them and the passion behind it. But more than anything, it was the way the community responded. It was councils like the one you were on. Back then, I had a bit more hair back in 07 or 08. But back then, so many people took risk and kind of bet on us and said, hey, there's something here. And that was municipalities and folks like yourself and Mayor Halloran and the rest of Waterloo Council at that time. It was Waterloo North Hydro. It was businesses like Virtual Causeway and Athena Software, other entrepreneurs that maybe saw some part of their own entrepreneurial journey and what we were looking to start and wanted to support, and also looking to do something around climate. For so many, it for me at the time in particular, felt so disempowered by the international negotiations. And I feel like a lot of us in Waterloo Region, this was a way for us to make a difference. And, it's tens of thousands of tons that have been reduced while, as you mentioned earlier, businesses also increase their profitability. The insurance sector, we had 7 of the 10 largest insurance companies that joined in within the first 3 or 4 years. Tech, manufacturing, the number of manufacturers that participated, Veriform being, now a national story, where, they cut their emissions in half and doubled their profitability at the same time. The fact that enough people in our community really rallied around it, that was such a critical, and yeah, like I said, took a risk on this new idea. And now, other communities have now followed suit.
Yeah, I think that was what was it came off the page, even as it was more in its conceptual early days, was that there was a practical part of what you were asking of council, but also of the people and companies that were getting involved. And some of it was education. So you would go in and say, here's how you can reduce your greenhouse gases or do those sorts of things. And also recognition for business, not that they need it, but it's one of those things, as you're especially at the forefront of saying, let's recognize those that are being the leaders. And I think those two things are, I think, if my memory sticks, were two of the things I thought those are important pieces. And then of course your leadership, because leaders got to lead, and sometimes the leaders got to lead by themselves before they get followers. And I think those three things put together really kind of were the thing that the three legs of the stool, if you will.
Well, yeah, and you can talk recognition all you want, but if nobody shows up, the businesses aren't going to care, right?
Yep.
And so I go back to within the first couple of years, 500 people were coming out to this recognition night, dozens and dozens of volunteers, and so that snowball effect, the way that the community responded to this idea, and the way that people invested their time. I can think of, the dozens of people in those early days on a shoestring budget. Know it well, working with so many of the small businesses through the chamber, members of yours, that so much of this work is done because of the passion of the people that are involved. And that's when we knew we'd really struck a chord, is when, that first event in 2009, it was in the middle of a snowstorm, and we'd been pitching in the midst of, at the time, the subprime mortgage crisis. It was a difficult time to be talking about a new idea. And we didn't know we'd get 20 people there. 200 people showed up, including a number of, business leaders, the mayor and others. That's when we started to see that, okay, this community is ready to rally around this. And like many other entrepreneurs, I had my exit plan written up over the, 5 months in, when enough, we'd been pitching this idea of, initial sponsors, and, those first few, it wasn't looking too encouraging. So, we're always going to have those ups and downs. But again, I go back, and any young person I get a chance to chat with, or really any entrepreneur, when I look back at what helped us push through, it was that deep sense of calling, that no matter what the challenge was, some folks might know I've got a bit of a stutter. In those early days, coming out of a networking event, feeling like, okay, I'm some young 20-something, stuttered through a conversation. What business do I, should I even keep doing this at all? But to me at the time, the climate crisis felt so much bigger than my stutter. So of course we're gonna push on. And then when we saw the community then rally around it, we felt so uplifted by that. And again, I go back to, there's something special in our community. And it's people who know they have influence, who use that influence to take risks alongside others and to lift others up. In fact, I see some people on the call this afternoon, some familiar names that did that for me. And I hope to be able to be doing the same for others.
Well, maybe that's a good place to pivot, because the story of getting sustainable Waterloo, which was not a sure thing, as you talk about. Those early days, who knows whether seed funding was going to get others to actually get aboard and be part of it. But you accomplished that. And I remember you calling up, I don't know, it must have been at the chamber, maybe just started the chamber. And you said you were moving on and starting this or trying to grow the national organization. And I remember we talked about that, and I probably had some what I would characterize as worthless advice when you were going to Ottawa, but I always categorize it as it's advice, and it's worth what you pay for. And since it was free, you couldn't go wrong with it. But talk about how that part of the story, right? Of going from getting it up and running with Sustainable Waterloo, becoming a successful organization, seeing that benefit here in Waterloo region, and why you took the risk, because it's another risk, to start a national organization. That is not easy to do, because there are 1.5 million national organizations, and a lot of them in the same space. So tell me what what was the value proposition or the reason you branched out into that national organization, and why you thought it was going to be successful?
I'm not sure we knew it was going to be successful or not, but we knew we had more and more people coming to us from across the country and around the world. And so they were saying, what is going on in Waterloo region? You've got businesses who are paying you money to set climate goals above what regulation is requiring them to do. Could we do something similar? I was a prof at Niagara College, a leader in Hamilton, then someone in North Carolina. We did one conversation through a translator with someone in the Ukraine. And so I remember coming back at the time, we just started kind of like Sunday afternoons. I said, okay, sure. They asked if I'd be willing to kind of chat with them about what we'd done and share the business plan. So we started doing this kind of ad hoc coaching on the weekends, but then, started to have a life of its own. The Niagara team launched their green economy hub and asked if I'd come down for their launch party. And I remember on the drive back, the sense of guilt of like, I'm meant to be leading this Waterloo region based organization. I just spent all day in Niagara. And so I brought it to our board and I asked that group, what they thought. Of course we had several options. We could let them go on their own. We could, branch out and, turn this into a national entity, but it was really a question of, should we do anything at all? Is this even our job? And the board chair, my prof from Laurier, Barry Colbert is his name. He jumped in early on and said, it doesn't really matter who does it, but if we've got something here that's having any impact on the climate crisis at all, it's on us to figure out how to do it. So figure it out. And that's what we did. We went back to the Trillium Foundation to get some funding to write the next business plan for what would become a national association. We reached out to see what the right model would be for scaling up. And then personally, I felt that for myself, this was what I was uniquely positioned to do, that I had that lived experience. And so that's what made a lot of sense, bringing, Tove in, who I mentioned earlier, an incredible leader. Others can continue to grow what we'd started in Waterloo region. But myself and another good friend, Priyanka Lloyd, who was another Laurier grad who'd been working together at this for some time. The two of us kind of then branched off and started Green Economy Canada with the aspiration that, hey, if we could, it was at that point, it was 14% of the workforce in Waterloo region was part of, going above regulations, setting targets. What if we had hundreds of businesses across the country? Wouldn't that have an impact when it comes to climate policy Canada wide? And if that's the case, let's go and see what we could do. And so we saw it as an experiment of, the question always was, could this work somewhere else? Is this something that's unique to Waterloo region? Or is there a core innovation here that, working in partnership with another community organization and recognizing that Sudbury or Fredericton have a different context, that we could work within the context of another community to scale up this, social innovation from Waterloo region. And so we kind of set out on that path.
Well, I think that what has served you well, certainly in going from Sustainable Waterloo to Green Economy Canada, is that, and you've mentioned it several times, that sense of entrepreneurship and that innovative spirit. I mean, which is partly, it's a big part of Waterloo region's success. But not everyone has it, or people think they might have it and don't have it, and the proof of the pudding's in the eating. So good on you for getting that up and running. Let's move back a little bit. I'm interested. So we've heard about those two experiences and some of your earlier days leading up to 2019. That's a big decision to, you're leading a national organization. You've set up Sustainable Waterloo. Previous to that, there's lots of people who have, again, free advice, so it's worth what you pay, but come and say, I'm thinking of running for office. What are your thoughts? And I start with the downside and what it's going to mean to your life, and then finish off with it's really important work to do to be in elected office. But talk about how you came to that decision that was the right time, and remembering, and we'll talk a little bit more about the green politics, but having no one elected in Ontario, in fact, no one outside of BC on Vancouver Island, was not necessarily the smartest thing you've ever done, but it was heroic, and to the extent that you knew what you were getting into. So talk a little bit about making that decision and why that was the right time for you.
Well, let me go back a step. And first of all, I'm still getting used to this word politician. Never had any, that was never part of my trajectory. And in fact, when I stepped back from Green Economy Canada, and I see there's a board member on the line this afternoon as well. Nice to see you, Ken. Ken White's here. He's president of Corey Communications, and Corey, of course, was one of those early companies that got on and took on some risk with us. And I remember when I spoke with the board at Green Economy, I was just taking a step back to refresh and renew. I felt that it had been a decade. Priyanka was ready to lead Green Economy Canada. Priyanka continues to lead Green Economy, and again, has done incredible things to take Green Economy from provincial to national, and that's her leadership. And if there's one thing I'm most proud of, it's that with the board, to be in a position to look back at both organizations being led by two incredible women who have taken those organizations further in their time in leadership roles. But for me, I believe deeply in this idea that by letting go, a person can let something new come in. And when I took a step back, I had a bit of time. I meant to take a year off. That was the original plan. But within a month, I read the more recent, at the time, it was the 1.5 degree report from the International Panel on Climate Change. And it was pretty striking what the language they were using about the crisis we're in at a time of what seemed to me like hyper partisanship that was really disappointing to me, and deep wealth inequality. And so it was over the holidays of 2018, when I was kind of processing that report, that it felt like another deep sense of calling. And, for those of us that have had the privilege to have a sense of calling like that, like there's no BS. You can't fake that. To me, that 2019 election felt like such an important moment to recognize that we're running out of time. And we happen to be living in this window. We got till 2030 to cut emissions in half. And so, what's the point of anything else if there's no safe climate future for our kids and our grandkids and our nieces and nephews? And so that's what led me to run. And then the decision about which party to run with, I had never been a member. Most Canadians aren't members of political parties. In fact, leading a nonprofit, I wouldn't be in a picture with another. I didn't want to be in any way connected to a political party. And so my first choice when I decided to run was which party to run with. And I spoke with several. For me, the reason I chose the Greens is, to your point, from a political point of view, it wasn't the most politically advantageous choice, right? I can do math. The Greens were at 3% in the 2015 election. However, more important to me was that my first choice in politics, I wanted to be ensuring was one that centered my integrity and not some kind of a political choice about what's the easiest way to get elected. And for me, looking at the Greens, I saw values that were my values, values like participatory democracy and nonviolence, social justice and ecological wisdom, and also an openness to putting people ahead of politics. And what I mean by that is they're the only party that don't have a whipped vote. It means that every single day now in the House of Commons, my accountability is first and foremost to the thousands of people I spoke with in my community. Not that we all agree on everything, but the job is to put community first, to be a representative for my community, as opposed to a spokesperson for a political party. And that to me centers democracy, and it ensures that I can stay true to myself while in an arena that is pretty corrosive, right? Whether it's power or ego or partisanship, there's so much about this world that I think is designed to either remove integrity from a person or remove a person with integrity from the process altogether. We've got no shortage of examples, right? Jody Wilson, Raybould being a more recent example. And so I wanted to make a choice, however, you know, I recognize the ambition and the challenge that was in front of us. But I wanted to make sure it was a choice that should we be successful, and that was the goal from day one, was to actually, it wasn't just to influence the conversation, it was to represent my community as MP, that would be one that would allow me to do it while holding on to my sense of self.
This will be chapter 2, because we'll have to have a whole hour talking about the practical part of that, because I think that's an important talk about the integrity and speaking for the constituents that you represent, while at the same time recognizing that that has very limited capacity to work in the political structure that we have, or at least in my view. But I think we could have a really interesting conversation on how, but what I think we would both agree on is that the political system is in need of a shakeup, so that the more stuff gets done for more people, with more people involved in the decision making. So I think let's park that one over here, because we often will have these conversations over coffee at the chamber office. So, but we'll do it next time in front of this in a larger group, because I think that's a really important discussion. But let's move on. And I think, there's some practical parts of what you have to do. And for any MP, MPP, even counselors, is your constituent services, like representing and answering people's questions, not only here in Waterloo Region, obviously, but in Ottawa. That's a unique, offering, and you need the right people on your staff, because they're doing most of that work. But, talk a little bit about that, because that's something which is learned, like how to navigate, how to help people with their problems, and approach bureaucracy, approach the politicians and the elected officials. How have you what's your approach to that?
We got tested on this on day one. I was in orientation here in Ottawa the day that the leader of the Green Party announced their resignation, which meant immediately a rush of interviews about whether I was going to consider running as leader of the Green Party. And the reason I shared that at the time, that I wasn't going to pursue that, is actually exactly what you're raising now, Ian, is how much I want to stay focused on being a good MP for Kitchener Centre first and foremost. And those emails started to come in the day after the election. The number of people who started to reach out to our office to say, hey, I've been trying and trying to get somebody to listen to my application on my permanent residency, or a family member in another country, a son or daughter or spouse, the gut-wrenching stories that started to come to our office. And I think such a critical part of this role is using the access and influence that we have through the office of MP to work on behalf of neighbors across Kitchener Centre, to follow up with these various departments to make progress for them, which goes back to, my very first conversation with the Prime Minister was at COP26 just a few weeks back. And the first thing I got a chance to share was, yes, I'm going to be pushing you on climate. I'm going to be doing it respectfully, though. And his response back, and I believe it was a genuine response back, he said, Mike, I already know that about you, and I'm looking forward to working with you. And that respectful approach is, to me, how we get things done. And I recognize that this arena is set up. You have parties sitting on opposite sides. You're going to call one opposition. You're going to use the word critic. It's all designed to create animosity and conflict. However, and in addition to, yes, there's room for accountability. And I think we can be assertive while still being respectful. And that's a big part. When I got the question so often in this campaign, the question changed. In 2019, everyone asked me, why do you think you can win? And it was an important question and a fair question. And I felt it was our job to demonstrate to our community that it was possible. I'll show you the numbers in terms of money raised, the number of volunteers. The person who said to the Liberal canvasser who came by one day, what took you so long? The Greens have already been here twice. So that was the job in the first one. In the second campaign, the question became, what impact can you have as a Green MP? And what I found myself talking about was other elected Greens, whether it's Elizabeth in BC, Mike Schreiner in Guelph, Peter Bevan Baker, who is leading the Green official opposition in PEI, And what is in common amongst all these elected Greens is their respect for democracy and for other parliamentarians. And so that means already when we're having conversations with ministers, whether it's the Minister of Mental Health or Housing or Natural Resources, my goal is not to just get a clip to shame the minister. It's actually to figure out how we can make progress on housing, mental health, and climate. And so that goes right back to the question, Ian, that I think by building those relationships, by others recognizing that we're actually in it together. The Minister for Immigration, Refugee, and Citizenship, he and I have had a number of good conversations, and that's going to make it that much easier when we need to escalate a case, that I know that case is going to get heard.
So, and I just want to, a part of that is that in terms of goals in the House of Commons, here's the practical reality. While you are a member of the Green Party, in the eyes, again, this could be for our other conversation, the House of Commons does not recognize you as a member of a party. They recognize you as the independent member for Kitchener Centre. On top of that, you have a party that does not have party status, again, in regard, and on top of that, you've had the party, I don't even know what to describe it. I've never seen anything like it, because I thought Conservatives were the best at hamstringing their leaders, but make no mistake, there's a whole different level of what the party did. No, whatever you think about Annie Paul or whatever, how they did it and how publicly they did it was not helpful to you, and it wasn't helpful to the cause that the Green Party wants to put out on top, because it's the old adage, you wouldn't do business with someone if you don't think they can run their business, and you wouldn't vote for somebody or for a party and give them power if you didn't think they were capable of managing themselves. So you got those two challenges. How are you? I mean, and I know you're focused on your local citizens and the business community and climate as it relates to here to a large extent, and that's right. But you still have to live in that other world, which is parties matter, House of Commons, and how you can use that vehicle. Those things are all very difficult in this circumstance. What's your, how do you kind of pull all those I don't know, those very slippery ropes together?
Well, first of all, let me point out this pin I'm wearing. This pin happens to be green, but this is the pin worn by every parliamentarian that lets security folks here on the Hill, as you know, lets them know that this is an MP. And so I see myself first and foremost as a parliamentarian, one among 337 other colleagues looking to get things done. I also want to honor what you shared, Ian. The turmoil in the party over the past year was a really difficult time. And I go back to the number of conversations I had, even with folks who had taken a lawn sign in 2019. And I got a chance to see them and they say, Mike, can we just talk about? And I would say, yes, of course. I'm disappointed too. I'm concerned as well. Here is where I've sought to use the influence and privilege that I have to seek change. And here's also why I'm optimistic in terms of the new federal council led by a strong Indigenous woman, the renewal on that council, the people here's why I believe in them. Here's my perspective. And I'm not going to give you a talking point. I'm not going to read from a card. I'm not going to become that. I'm always going to try to stay honest. And I think that was important both in the campaign, and it's just as important here and now. As you know, the lounges are separated between government and opposition. Mm-hmm. That means when I'm on a lunch break, I have a chance to speak with people from three different parties, the Bloc, the NDP, and the Conservatives. I relish those opportunities. In fact, the best part, I've been on the Hill now, this is my third week. The best part has been the amount of time I've been able to spend getting to know other MPs, hearing about their journeys. Every single person elected has an incredible story of their journey, their decision, the sacrifices they've made, the people that have surrounded them to be here. I've gotten a chance to hear those stories, hear their priorities, and again, find the common ground. I'll use housing as an example. Name me one parliamentarian who isn't going to agree that the cost of housing is absolutely out of control, and that we should be doing more, that homes should be for people, not just commodities for investors. In fact, a fairly prominent conservative I spoke with, the member for Carleton, for example, who will give the government quite a hard time on inflation day in and day out. He and I had a good conversation, and I chose in that conversation to start with where I thought we might agree, which is on the cost of housing, and to have an exchange around what are the policies that maybe we could agree on, that we could find some common ground around. So yes, I recognize, as you said, in the House of Commons, to be recognized as an official party, it takes 12 seats. Well, the Conservatives, Bloc, and NDP all have experience of being less than 12 seats. And so others have had a similar experience. They recognize that as an elected Green, I'm going to make, the most of every opportunity. I'm jumping up and down every chance I can get. That meant, getting a chance to ask a question of the Prime Minister last week on vacancy taxes, asking about decriminalization earlier this week. I'm going to use every opportunity in the House of Commons with, recognizing the challenges that are presented, while also recognizing being one of a caucus of two. I think I've just about had more interventions in the last 2.5 weeks than the former member for Kitchener Centre did in 2 years. So I'm going to use every chance I can get in the House of Commons. But I think more importantly, it's in the approach. It's in looking to build relationships with 337 other parliamentarians that I'm going to be able to make the most progress for the things that our community, and when I say our community, I mean Waterloo Region. Kitchener Centre is a political construct, and I know you said we might get a chance to come back to Team Waterloo Region, but I really believe that my interest here is in speaking alongside the 4 other elected representatives for ridings in Waterloo Region and bringing our shared interests. I actually wish that MPs could sit geographically as opposed to by party. I think that would really change the dynamic, because we're really bringing the interests of our community. And while I recognize that the Constitution has me representing Kitchener Centre, it's really Waterloo Region that I identify with.
Well, it's coming from the chamber network, which is, again, probably that same old construct. I mean, it's an act of parliament that says Greater Kitchener-Waterloo Chamber or the Cambridge Chamber of Commerce, and we geographically do. But I think what certainly COVID has, and I've always believed this, that this is really not Kitchener-Waterloo and Woolwich Township, and that when it comes to Woolwich or Wellesley or North Dumfries or Cambridge, that I somehow don't have some responsibility and interest in them being successful or addressing their issues. And I think Greg would agree too. And so it leads me to, and you talked about it, the sort of the Team Waterloo Region approach. And I say this is not, this is just a plain political reality. It was surprising to everyone that there is no cabinet minister from Windsor to Brampton and from Owen Sound, well, as a matter of fact, further north, but from Owen Sound basically down to Hamilton. There's not one cabinet minister in southwestern Ontario. That's shocking, given the import for any number of different reasons. But politics is politics, and the reality is the reality. One of the things that we've tried to work on through Best Waterloo, which is as many you certainly know, but our listeners would know, Business Economic Support Team of Waterloo Region, the 2 chambers, Communitech, Waterloo Economic Development, and Explore Waterloo, which are by and large the 5 big business organizations, is to have this Team Waterloo Region approach. And we've convened and will continue to do just opportunities for all 5 of our local federal officials to have some conversations with us around issues of importance, whether it's in the budget, whether it's regulatory issues, any number of things. And it works both ways. What's important to the elected officials, what's important to business. That's been, I think, one of the things that can build out of a situation where we don't have a quote voice at the cabinet table, but we have 5 strong voices for the region of Waterloo, and the importance of our economy and our communities to the national economy and national life. That's something I think I think it builds on what you're describing, which is the team first, or the individual and the community first versus the party.
Well, let me first say though how disappointed I am as well. Like, even just Waterloo region, 500,000 people. Compare it to Ottawa. I think the Ottawa region's got almost every MP is at least a cabinet minister or a parliamentary secretary. So with 4 of 5 MPs from Waterloo region being in government, that not one of them is at the cabinet table, I share in that disappointment. I was glad to see that that Brian May has been appointed parliamentary secretary to defense. But certainly something is amiss in terms of the representation across southwestern Ontario, and that's disappointing to see. In terms of working with the rest of the Waterloo Region team, these are people that I know and respect over so many years. Tim, for example, Tim's in it for all the right reasons, and to get a chance to be working alongside MP Lewis, MP Chagger, MP Bradford, and of course the Parliamentary Secretary to National Defense. Collectively, we are going to continue to be advocating for Waterloo Region. And I really appreciate, Best WR, for example, bringing together the 5 of us for those kinds of conversations. And while we might not agree on everything, I think there's a lot that we could be pushing on together. I'll go to mental health as another example. I know that we share concerns around mental health. When it comes to the opioid epidemic, I know we share concerns there as well. And so those are conversations that I think working alongside them and through the Liberal caucus, I think we can make progress together to be, pushing for, again, I'll use the example from just last week. The Liberals promised in their platform a vacancy tax. They promised to fast track a Canada disability benefit, which would be, essentially a universal basic income for Canadians with disabilities. These are things that I know colleagues across Waterloo Region are also interested in. And so I want to be working alongside them to be, encouraging and pushing this government to follow through on the things they promised that they would do. And I think it's far more constructive to be doing so as a group.
Listen, we're just about out of time, but I wanted to save the last few minutes to kind of get your perspective, and people can have all kinds of views about these great big international conferences like COP. That you were recently at that, so maybe describe. I don't think I've never been to them, but I know people that have, and how big they are, how complex they are, the choreography around them, the who gets into meetings and who doesn't. Is there anything that really gets done at those conferences, or whether it's all kind of prepackaged? I mean, maybe give your observations around that, because it's portrayed as being a seminal event in the whole issue around international action on climate. But I'm interested in what your observations of it would be, and frankly, what are the practical parts that post-COP that Canada needs to do? I mean, they've got ambitious targets, and if some people can disagree with those targets, but if you're actually going to achieve the numbers that you say, or we got a lot of work to do. So maybe start with COP and bring it back to what does our agreement, or what we've agreed to, actually practically mean? Because that is where it always gets tough. The politics meets the public policy, and I hate to say this, but public policy usually loses.
Yeah, I actually agree with you for the most part, Ian. You said essentially in different ways what Greta Thunberg also said. Greta Thunberg's critique was this is just a bunch of blah, blah, blah. And so for me, I was one of only 4 MPs that was a part of it. I had 4 goals in being there. And now, again, the reason I went is because of what a priority climate and following the science on climate is to our neighbors. And so I wanted to go to, first of all, to advocate, to learn about how and if this is a constructive mechanism to get progress on climate, to build relationships. In particular, there's Greens elected around the world and in government, whether it's in Iceland, Scotland, New Zealand, getting a chance to connect with them and how they've been able to make progress in their parliaments, as well as with, the critic in the Conservative Party on the environment, MP Albus, MP Michaud from the Bloc, having a chance to connect with them here, and also reporting back to let folks in our community know what really is going on here. And the sum for me is that while there was a lot of inspiration in the street from young people and Indigenous leaders and activists, I was pretty disappointed with what I saw happening inside the formal confines of COP26. And beyond the flash of various announcements, the reality that while our the target is not quite science-based, but it's ambitious. It's a 40 to 45. It's in that range by 2030. Our fair share would be more like 60% by 2030. However, we're still subsidizing fossil fuels. And coming out of COP, the federal government has agreed to stop the international subsidies. There's about $1 billion of those, but there's 17 billion more of domestic subsidies to oil and gas that could immediately be repurposed towards investing in the jobs, in the transition for the training for oil and gas workers, investing in climate adaptation. How about investing in retrofits, the number of jobs we could create if we were to incentivize homeowners to do that next retrofit, to incentivize purchases of electric vehicles. There's 17 billion there that we can use. And so, recognizing time, that is just one of many examples. Those are the kinds of policies that, yes, I spoke with the Minister for Environment and Climate Change, Minister Guilbeault, when we were at COP. I brought it up again when we came back. I'll be bringing it up again tomorrow. They most recently had, some folks will be aware, the Commissioner for Environment and Sustainable Development came out with their most recent report. They showed that we have this emissions reduction fund that actually led to increases in oil and gas production and no verifiable emission reductions. They've spent 60 million so far. This is just another subsidy. There's 600 million left that they could reallocate. And so those were the kinds of announcements I was hoping for at COP. And now that we're back home, those are the ones I'm going to continue to constructively and respectfully encourage this government to show us a plan for how they're going to follow the science and center climate justice while we do it.
Well, I think it's important, and I would say, just, and this isn't politics, I would say that there are very few people left who don't recognize something needs to happen, and to believe that words do not cut the mustard anymore, whether it's liberals or, frankly, the other end of the spectrum, saying words and not actually having a plan, because that's not acceptable either way, is to have a plan and not deliver on it, or not have a plan and not deliver on it. It's the same issue. But I think there are some practical pieces here of how you do the transition. And I think that's where there's not enough conversation, as there may be too much on the goal and not enough on how to get there. So
Bingo.
You know what? Let's park that for our next discussion, because I think that's another one we can talk about. We can talk about all things politics, if you will, and then we can talk about that public policy, because that I think is the part that, and it never gets fully discussed in an election campaign, because it's hard to get past the bumper stickers. But it's an important topic for business, for small business, and for individuals and their pocketbooks, because all of these things have an impact. So listen, Mike, I appreciate it. I know how busy you are. Thank you for taking an hour of your busy schedule for joining us today. I thought it was a great opportunity for people to understand you're one of our leading federal representatives, and great opportunity for people to get to know you as well as I do, and appreciate you taking the time.
Well, thanks again, Ian, for the invitation, to you and the Chamber for putting these on, for asking me to be a part of it. It's I've been looking forward to it all week. So I really appreciate the chance. And to folks who joined us online, I really appreciate you all making time to be a part of this conversation. Feel free to reach out and be in touch. On COP, for example, I put a blog up on that topic just a few weeks back. You can find it at mikemorricemp.ca, as well as ways to get in touch there. So thank you all again also for joining us. And Ian, to you and your incredible team, you're all just working so hard. And so I hope you get a wonderful chance to take a bit of a rest over the holiday season too. Thank
Well,
you.
I always make it a habit of hiring smarter people than me. So, but once again, just as we wrap up, I want to take a moment to thank our title sponsor, Manulife. They're great partners of the Chamber and help us to do the work that we for on behalf of the community and our members. Again to our community partner, the platinum sponsor for the series, the Immigration Partnership of Waterloo Region, and finally to all of you for watching us live today, or many will watch it on our podcast and through the links that will come out in the coming days. This does wrap up our last Business Success Series session for the balance of 2021. We look forward to welcoming you all back on Wednesday, January 19th at 1 p.m. On behalf of the Chamber, I'd like to wish you all and your families a safe and happy holiday season. To find out about our events that are upcoming in the new year, visit greaterkwchamber.com. And join us again in the new year on Wednesday, January 19th, because if it's Wednesday, it's the Business Success Series. Thanks so much, everyone. Have a great afternoon.